If you've ever walked through a car dealership and stared at the price tag on a basic sedan, you've probably had the same thought most people never say out loud. Oh, is actually affording this. A car that used to represent a sensible middle-class purchase now costs person $40,000 and $45 and sometimes $50,000. And yet dealerships keep selling them like it's completely normal. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Just because a bank approves your loan does not mean you can actually afford the car. There's a massive difference between S qualifying for a vehicle and S living comfortably after buying one. Today on Ask FiscalRelics, we're going to do something car dealerships absolutely hate. We're going to run the Al's real math. Not the sales pitch, not the monthly payment trick, not the you deserve it marketing, just the numbers. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the average new car price no longer matches the average income and why millions of people are becoming ex-car poor without realizing it's and the 6 financial rules that determine whether a car purchase is actually affordable. Because sometimes the smartest financial decision is realizing the game was never designed for you to win. For most people, the shock doesn't come from walking into a dealership. It comes from the moment they actually look at the price tag on a normal car. Not a luxury car, not a performance model, just a regular vehicle that blends into traffic. And suddenly 40,000 or 45,000, sometimes even 50,000. A decade or two ago, those prices were associated with high-end vehicles. Today, they're attached to cars that are marketed as the practical, responsible choice for everyday families. That shift didn't happen overnight, but it happened fast enough that most people never fully processed it. Right now, the average price of a brand new vehicle in the United States sits somewhere around ours $45,000 to $80,000. That's not the luxury market. That's the middle of the market. Pickup trucks routinely cross those at $50,000. Mid-size SUVs, the kind families buy because they need space for kids and groceries, easily land in the exit $40,000 to $55,000 range. Even many compact cars that used to represent the cheap option now start well above us in $25,000 before options. And those starting prices rarely stay where they begin. Because the moment you add normal features, safety packages, upgraded interiors, technology packages, or even basic conveniences, the price quickly climbs several $1,000s higher. Suddenly that $28,000 starting price quietly becomes $34,000 or $36,000 out the door. But here's where the real problem starts to appear. While vehicle prices have surged upward over the last decade, as income growth hasn't kept up at the same pace, the median household income in the United States currently sits somewhere around $70,000 into $75,000 per year. At first glance, that might sound like a comfortable number. But when you place it next to modern car prices, something starts to feel off. Because when a household earning roughly $75,000 is looking at a vehicle price near $45,000, that purchase is no longer a small financial decision. It's a massive one. Think about what that ratio actually means. For many households, buying an average new car now requires spending more than half of their entire yearly income on a single asset. And not just any asset, a depreciating one. Unlike a home or an investment account, a car immediately begins losing value the moment it leaves the dealership lot. Within the first year alone, many vehicles lose 25% of their values. Over several years, that depreciation can exceed 40–50%. So what people are effectively doing is committing a large portion of their annual income to something that is guaranteed to decline in value over time. Yet culturally, this has somehow become normal. Advertisements constantly show families casually driving brand new vehicles as if purchasing one is simply part of everyday adult life. Commercials present it as a milestone: graduate, get a job, buy a house, buy a new car. But those messages were created in a very different economic environment. Several decades ago, the relationship between income and car prices looked very different. In many cases, a typical new vehicle costs somewhere around 6 to 8 months of a person's salary. That meant someone earning a middle-class income could realistically buy a new car without stretching their finances too far. Today, that same purchase can represent over a year of income for many individuals. And when an asset starts costing that much relative to income, the financial risk increases dramatically because the purchase doesn't exist in isolation. People still have to pay for housing, groceries, healthcare, utilities, childcare, insurance, debt payments, every one of those expenses competes with the cost of transportation. Yet the car market has continued to climb higher, largely because financing options allow buyers to stretch their budgets further than they otherwise would. Instead of prices adjusting to match incomes, loan terms simply became longer. Monthly payments became the focus rather than total cost. And that shift made extremely expensive vehicles appear temporarily manageable, at least on paper. But the underlying math never changed. If prices rise significantly faster than wages, eventually fewer people can comfortably afford the product. That's exactly the situation many households now face. Cars that were once considered basic transportation have gradually moved into a price range that resembles a major financial commitment. And when you step back and look at the numbers objectively, the disconnect becomes hard to ignore. A system where the average vehicle costs close to $50,000, while the typical household earns roughly $75 and creates a financial equation that doesn't naturally balance. Yet, because the change happened gradually, many people simply adjusted their expectations without realizing how dramatically the landscape had shifted. What used to be a practical purchase slowly turned into one of the largest financial obligations most households take on, second only to housing. And that reality sets the stage for everything that comes next. One of the most powerful tactics used in the car industry is also one of the simplest, shifting your attention away from the total price of the vehicle and focusing almost entirely on the monthly payment. When most people start shopping for a car, they assume the conversation will revolve around the price of the vehicle. After all, that's how we normally buy things. If you walk into a store to buy a phone, a television, or a laptop, the number you care about most is the total cost. But inside a dealership, the conversation almost immediately changes. Instead of asking, how much does the car cost? Buyers are often asked a completely different question. How much are you comfortable paying per month? That single question quietly reframes the entire financial decision, because once the discussion moves to monthly payments, the total price of the vehicle becomes much less visible. What matters instead is whether the payment fits within a number that feels manageable at first glance. And that's where the illusion begins. Imagine a car priced around a 48 nose and gutters. At face value, that number feels extremely large for many households. Writing a check for $48,000 would make most buyers stop and reconsider immediately. But very few people pay the full amount up front. Instead, the price gets stretched across a loan. Today, the most common auto loan terms range from 60 to 72 months, and increasingly even Z-setters 84 months in some cases. By spreading the cost over 5, 6, or 7 years, the monthly payment suddenly looks far less intimidating. For example, the 48,000 vehicle financed over 72 months at roughly 8% interest results in a payment somewhere around $750 to $800 per month, depending on the down payment. Now compare how those two numbers feel psychologically. For 48,000 sounds enormous, 780 per month sounds possible. And that difference in perception is exactly what dealerships rely on. Because when buyers think in terms of monthly payments, they begin adjusting their expectations around what feels affordable rather than what is financially sensible in the long term. A buyer might walk into the dealership thinking they can spend around $500 per month. But after sitting with a salesperson looking at nicer trims, upgraded interiors, larger vehicles, and better technology packages, the number slowly creeps upward. Maybe it becomes $690, then $960, $90. Then someone says, for just a little more each month, you could get the upgraded model. Suddenly, the buyer is considering $750 or $800 per month, even though that number would have felt uncomfortable just an hour earlier. This gradual escalation happens because monthly payments feel abstract. They don't immediately trigger the same sense of financial caution that a large total price might. But the payment isn't the only piece of the puzzle. Interest plays a significant role as well. When a vehicle is financed, the buyer is not just paying for the car, they're paying for the cost of borrowing the money at interest rates around 7% to 9%, which have become common in recent years for many borrowers. The total cost of the vehicle increases substantially over the life of the loan. A car that costs $48,000 today may ultimately cost $55,000 to $100,000 or more by the time all payments are complete. That additional money doesn't improve the car, add features, or extend its lifespan. It simply represents the price of financing the purchase. Yet, because the loan spreads those costs across dozens of payments, the extra expense often goes largely unnoticed. The buyer sees the monthly payment and mentally files the purchase under manageable. But another subtle factor makes the monthly payment illusion even more powerful: time. A 6-year loan term pushes the financial consequences far into the future. 6 years can feel distant and abstract when you're sitting in a dealership, excited about driving home in a new vehicle. But in reality, that commitment means making the same payment every single month for the next 72 months. During that time, many aspects of life can change: jobs change, expenses change, families grow, unexpected emergencies appear, yet the car payment remains fixed. In many cases, the vehicle itself begins losing value faster than the loan balance decreases. This situation is often called Zerches negative equity, where the owner owes more on the loan than the car is worth. That becomes a major problem if the owner needs to sell the car, trade it in, or replace it earlier than planned. But none of those long-term scenarios are part of the conversation when the deal is being made. Instead, the discussion revolves around making the monthly number work. Salespeople know that if the payment can be shaped into something that feels acceptable, many buyers will move forward even if the total cost stretches their finances further than they intended. Lower monthly payments can be achieved in several ways. Extending the loan term is one option. Reducing the down payment is another. Rolling existing loan balances into a new loan is sometimes used as well. Each of these methods lowers the immediate payment, but they also increase the total financial commitment in the long run. The buyer walks away feeling like the deal worked within their budget. But what actually happened is that the timeline of the expense was simply stretched further into the future. And because the monthly payment looks manageable on paper, the much larger question, whether the car itself is financially reasonable, often goes unexamined. This shift from vast total cost to WAS monthly payment is one of the most effective psychological strategies in modern car sales. It allows extremely expensive vehicles to appear attainable to a much larger group of buyers than would otherwise consider them. The number people should be paying the most attention to quietly fades into the background, while the smaller number becomes the entire focus of the decision. When most people think about the cost of owning a car, the first number that comes to mind is the monthly payment. It's the number printed on the loan agreement. It's the number that shows up on the bank statement every month. And it's usually the number that determines whether someone believes they can afford the vehicle. But the payment is only one part of the financial reality. Owning a car involves a collection of ongoing expenses that quietly add up over time. Many of them are unavoidable, and together they can dramatically increase the true cost of transportation. The first major cost beyond the loan payment is insurance. When a vehicle is financed, lenders typically require full coverage insurance, which includes both collision and comprehensive protection. This requirement protects the bank's investment in case the car is damaged, stolen, or totaled. Full coverage insurance is significantly more expensive than the basic liability policies many drivers carry on older, paid-off vehicles. Depending on the driver's age, location, driving history, and the type of car being insured, monthly premiums can easily range between $150 and $300. For younger drivers or high-risk areas, the cost can climb even higher. For the sake of a conservative estimate, many financial planners suggest budgeting around $200 per month for insurance on a newer vehicle. That expense alone already pushes the monthly cost of ownership much higher than the loan payment itself. The next ongoing expense is gas of fuel. The average driver in the United States travels roughly 12,000 to 13,000 miles per year. Fuel efficiency varies widely between vehicles, but even a relatively efficient car averaging about 630 miles per gallon still requires hundreds of gallons of gasoline each year. If fuel prices hover around $3.50 per gallon, that driver may spend somewhere around as $400 to $600 annually, just to keep the car moving. Spread it translates to roughly $120 to $130 per month in fuel costs alone. While that number can fluctuate with gas prices or driving habits, it remains a consistent part of the transportation budget for most households. Then there is as maintenance, which many new car buyers initially underestimate. It's true that newer vehicles tend to require fewer repairs during their early years, but that doesn't mean maintenance disappears. Regular oil changes, tire rotations, fluid checks, air filters, and other routine services are necessary to keep the vehicle running properly. Even when some of these services are included temporarily through dealership maintenance packages, they eventually become the owner's responsibility. A typical oil change might cost anywhere between $1,050 and $100 depending on the type of oil required. Tire rotations and inspections add additional costs, and eventually every vehicle will need replacement parts such as brake pads, batteries, and tires. Tires alone can represent a surprisingly large expense. A full set of tires for a standard vehicle can easily cost $600 to $1,000 depending on the brand and size. Since most tires need replacement every 3 to 5 years, that cost becomes part of the long-term ownership equation. Rather than trying to predict exactly when these expenses will occur, many financial experts recommend setting aside roughly $100 per month for maintenance and wear and tear items. Some months the money may go unused, while other months a larger repair may require drawing from that reserve. This approach helps smooth out the unpredictable nature of vehicle upkeep. Another category of expenses involves registration, licensing, and local fees. Depending on the state or region, vehicle registration can cost anywhere from a modest yearly fee to several $100s annually. Some areas also charge additional taxes or inspection fees tied to vehicle ownership. Although these costs may only appear once or twice a year, they still represent real financial obligations that should be factored into the overall cost of ownership. Parking expenses can also become a factor in certain cities, particularly for people living in dense urban areas where monthly parking permits or garage fees may apply. All of these individual costs might appear manageable when viewed separately, but when combined with the loan payment, the picture begins to change. Consider a fairly typical scenario. A buyer finances a vehicle and ends up with a monthly payment of around $780. Add insurance at roughly $200 per month. Add fuel expenses around $1,125 per month. Add maintenance savings of $1,100 per month. Now the total monthly cost of owning and operating that vehicle rises to approximately $1,200 per month. And that estimate still assumes relatively stable fuel prices, routine maintenance, and no unexpected repairs. What started as a car with a payment under $800 quietly becomes a transportation expense exceeding $1,000 every single month. Over the course of a year, that represents roughly to $14,000 to $15,000 in spent simply to own and operate the vehicle. Over 6 years, the number grows even larger. And this is before accounting for depreciation, the gradual loss of the vehicle's value over time. Depreciation is often invisible in day-to-day finances because it doesn't show up as a bill, but it still represents a real financial cost. A vehicle purchased for $45,000 may only be worth $20,000 to $25,000 several years later depending on the model and mileage. That loss of value effectively represents thousands of dollars disappearing from the owner's balance sheet. When all of these factors are considered together, payments, insurance, fuel, maintenance, fees, and depreciation, the financial footprint of owning a vehicle becomes much larger than the simple monthly payment most buyers focus on. And because these additional costs appear gradually rather than all at once, many owners don't fully recognize the true cost of their transportation until months or even years after the purchase. Once you understand the real monthly cost of owning a vehicle, the next question becomes much more important. How does that expense fit into your income? Because affordability isn't determined by whether you can technically make the payment. Affordability is determined by whether the cost fits comfortably within the rest of your financial life. For decades, financial planners have used a simple guideline to help answer that question. It's often referred to as the 20% rule for transportation. The rule is straightforward. Your total transportation expenses should not exceed 20% of your gross monthly income, and that number includes everything connected to the vehicle, not just the loan payment. It includes insurance, fuel, maintenance, and any other regular costs required to keep the car on the road. The purpose of this guideline is simple. Transportation is a necessity for many people, but it shouldn't consume such a large portion of income that it prevents someone from saving, investing, or handling unexpected expenses. If too much income is tied up in car ownership, the rest of a household's financial stability begins to weaken. To see how this works in practice, consider a household earning around $175,000 per year, which is close to the median household income in the United States. At first glance, $75,000 may sound like a comfortable middle-class salary. But when we break that number down into monthly income, the picture becomes clearer. $807,000 in annual income translates to roughly $6,250 per month before taxes. Using the 20% guideline, that household's maximum transportation budget would be approximately as $1,250 per month. That was as $250 isn't meant for the loan payment alone. It represents the entire cost of owning and operating the vehicle. Now compare that number with the earlier estimate for the average new car. A typical ownership scenario might include a loan payment around the insurance near under $200 per month, fuel roughly $1,125 per month, of maintenance savings around fixed at $100 per month. When these expenses are combined, the total monthly transportation cost reaches approximately $200 per month. That number lands almost exactly at the maximum limit suggested by the 20% guideline. On the surface, it may appear that the purchase just barely works. But the rule assumes something important. It assumes that transportation expenses exist in isolation from other financial obligations. In reality, very few households have the luxury of starting with a completely clean financial slate. Many people carry as their student loan payments, which can easily range from a couple $100s to several $100s each month. Others may have credit card balances, personal loans, or other forms of debt that already consume a portion of their income. For example, the average credit card balance in the United States often sits around several $1,000s. Even modest balances can require minimum payments of $150 to $200 per month depending on interest rates. Student loans may add another as a $200 to $400 monthly for many borrowers. Once those existing obligations are included, the financial margin begins shrinking quickly. What originally looked like a manageable transportation expense now has to compete with multiple other fixed payments. At that point, even a small shift in expenses can create financial pressure. If insurance premiums increase slightly, if fuel prices rise, or if an unexpected repair occurs, the transportation budget can easily push beyond the safe range. And this analysis is based on gross income, not take-home pay. Gross income represents the total amount earned before taxes, retirement contributions, and other deductions are removed. Once those deductions are applied, the actual money available for spending becomes significantly smaller. A household earning $75,000 per year might take home something closer to $4,800 to $5,200 per month, depending on tax rates, health insurance contributions, and retirement savings. Now consider what happens when a transportation cost of roughly $1,200 per month is subtracted from that take-home income. The remaining budget must cover housing, food, utilities, healthcare, childcare, clothing, entertainment, savings, and any other expenses that come with daily life. Suddenly, the financial flexibility that once seemed possible begins to disappear. This is where the gap between S qualifying for a car loan and Sers comfortably affording a vehicle becomes obvious. Banks often approve loans based on debt to income ratios that allow borrowers to dedicate a large percentage of their earnings toward debt payments. As long as the numbers meet the lender's requirements, the loan can be approved even if the borrower's overall budget becomes extremely tight afterward. From the lender's perspective, the goal is simply to ensure that the borrower has enough income to reasonably make the payment. But that calculation doesn't account for every other financial responsibility a household carries. It doesn't measure whether the borrower will still have enough room in their budget to save for emergencies, invest for retirement, or absorb unexpected life events. And because the approval process focuses on technical qualification rather than financial comfort, many buyers walk away believing the purchase must be reasonable. After all, if the bank approved the loan, it must be affordable. But loan approval simply means the lender believes the borrower can make the payments under typical circumstances. It doesn't mean the purchase supports long-term financial stability. When transportation costs push too close to the upper limits of income, households lose the breathing room that protects them from financial stress. Budgets become fragile, savings slow down or disappear, and small disruptions that would otherwise be manageable can quickly turn into serious problems. That's why the income reality check is so important. Looking honestly at the relationship between income and transportation costs forces buyers to evaluate the purchase within the context of their entire financial life rather than focusing on a single monthly payment. At this point, a natural question begins to emerge. If the numbers are this tight for so many households, why do people continue buying expensive new vehicles? After all, dealerships keep selling them. Parking lots are full of newer cars. High-priced trucks and SUVs appear everywhere on the road. If the math is so difficult, how are so many people making it work? The answer is that many households are not making it work in the way we typically imagine. Instead, they are relying on a combination of financial adjustments that allow the purchase to happen, even if it quietly increases long-term financial pressure. One of the most common methods is extending the loan term. Years ago, the standard auto loan lasted about 4 or 5 years. Today, loans stretching a 6, 7, or even 8 years have become increasingly common. The longer the loan term, the lower the monthly payment appears. That makes a more expensive vehicle look affordable, even though the buyer remains in debt for a much longer period of time. But extending the loan also means paying interest for additional years. Over time, that extra interest can add thousands of dollars to the total cost of the car. Another method many buyers rely on is minimal or zero down payments. Putting money down reduces the amount that must be financed. However, many households no longer have several $1,000s available for a down payment, especially after accounting for housing costs, rising living expenses, and existing debt. As a result, buyers often finance nearly the entire price of the vehicle. While this allows them to drive away with little upfront cost, it also means they begin the loan with very little ownership equity in the car. In the early years of the loan, the balance owed can easily remain higher than the car's market value. That situation becomes particularly problematic if the owner needs to sell the car, trade it in, or replace it earlier than expected. Another increasingly common situation involves rolling negative equity into a new loan. Negative equity occurs when someone still owes money on their current vehicle, but wants or needs to purchase another one. Instead of paying off the remaining balance first, the unpaid portion of the old loan is sometimes added to the new loan for the replacement vehicle. For example, if someone still owes $5,000 on their existing car and purchases a new one, that $5,000 may simply be bundled into the new financing agreement. The result is that the buyer starts the new loan already owing more than the vehicle itself is worth. This practice allows people to upgrade vehicles more frequently, but it also compounds financial obligations over time. Beyond financing strategies, some households make the purchase work by adjusting other areas of their budget. Spending on entertainment, dining out, travel, or discretionary purchases may shrink in order to free up enough cash flow to maintain the car payment. At first, these adjustments might seem manageable, but over time, constantly tightening other areas of life to support a large fixed expense can create ongoing financial stress. Another common approach is relying on credit cards to cover expenses that were previously paid with cash. When budgets become tight, unexpected costs such as medical bills, home repairs, or car maintenance often end up on credit cards. This doesn't eliminate the expense. It simply moves it into another form of debt, often at significantly higher interest rates. Gradually, the financial strain spreads beyond the vehicle itself. All of these strategies allow people to maintain the appearance of affordability. From the outside, it looks as though the household successfully purchased and manages a newer vehicle. But internally, the budget may be under significant pressure. This situation is often described with a term that has become increasingly common in personal finance discussions, being car poor. Being car poor doesn't mean someone can't make the payment. It means the car consumes such a large portion of the household's financial resources that everything else becomes more difficult. Savings slow down or disappear. Emergency funds remain small or non-existent. Unexpected expenses create immediate stress. And financial flexibility, the ability to make choices without constantly worrying about money, becomes limited. For someone in this position, even relatively small disruptions can become major problems. A sudden repair costing several $100s may require borrowing money. A reduction in work hours or a temporary job change can make the monthly payment feel overwhelming. If another vehicle in the household requires maintenance at the same time, the financial strain compounds quickly. Because transportation is often essential for work and daily life, car payments also become one of the last expenses people are willing to give up. That means households may sacrifice other financial priorities to keep the vehicle. Retirement contributions may pause. Savings goals may be postponed. Debt balances elsewhere may slowly grow. The car continues moving, but the household's long-term financial progress slows down. In many cases, none of this is visible from the outside. The vehicle still looks new. It still represents convenience, reliability, and a sense of accomplishment. But beneath that surface, the cost of maintaining it may be shaping the household's financial life in ways that weren't fully anticipated when the purchase was made. When the numbers surrounding modern car ownership start to become clear, many people assume the only options are either stretching their finances to buy new or giving up reliable transportation entirely. But the reality is far less extreme. There are several ways to approach car ownership more strategically without placing unnecessary pressure on your finances. The first shift begins with changing how you think about what a car actually represents. For many people, vehicles have quietly evolved from simple transportation tools into symbols of success, status, or personal identity. Advertising has played a major role in shaping this perception. Commercials rarely focus on practicality or long-term financial consequences. Instead, they emphasize lifestyle, comfort, and prestige. The message is often subtle but powerful. Driving a certain type of car reflects who you are and where you stand socially. When purchases are influenced by that mindset, buyers may prioritize appearance, brand reputation, or the newest features rather than focusing purely on functionality and financial sustainability. A more stable financial approach begins by reframing the purpose of a vehicle. At its core, a car is a machine designed to move people from one place to another safely and reliably. Once that perspective becomes the starting point, many alternative choices begin to look far more reasonable. One of the most effective ways to reduce the financial burden of car ownership is choosing as used vehicles instead of brand new ones. New cars experience their most dramatic loss in value during the first few years of ownership. By purchasing a vehicle that is 2 or 3 years old, buyers often avoid a large portion of that initial depreciation while still gaining access to a relatively modern car. In many cases, these vehicles remain under manufacturer warranties and include most of the technology and safety features buyers want, but at a significantly lower purchase price. A car that originally sold for $40,000 may cost closer to $28,000 or $30,000 after a few years, even though its practical usefulness has barely changed. That difference alone can dramatically reduce the size of the loan required or make it possible to pay cash for the purchase. Another strategy involves theirs ours, keeping vehicles for longer periods of time. Modern cars are built to last far longer than vehicles from previous decades. With proper maintenance, many can easily reach the 50,000 to 200,000 miles or more. Yet many owners replace their cars long before that point, often because of cosmetic aging, the desire for new features, or the temptation of dealership promotions encouraging frequent upgrades. Extending the ownership timeline even a few extra years can produce significant financial benefits. Once a car loan is paid off, the monthly payment that once went toward financing can instead be redirected into savings or investments. Over time, that shift creates financial momentum that compounds in ways a car payment never could. Some buyers also choose to approach vehicle purchases with a goal of paying cash whenever possible. While saving enough money upfront may take longer, it eliminates the interest costs associated with financing and prevents long-term debt obligations tied to a depreciating asset. Even partial cash purchases can make a meaningful difference by reducing the size of the loan and lowering the monthly payment. Another important principle involves maintaining a healthy relationship between transportation costs and income. Instead of selecting a car based solely on what a lender will approve, financially cautious buyers often start by determining a comfortable monthly budget for transportation and then choosing vehicles that fit within that boundary. This approach protects other financial priorities, including emergency savings, retirement contributions, and everyday living expenses. Loan structure also plays a role in responsible car ownership. Shorter loan terms, such as 3 to 5 years instead of 6 or 7, may produce higher monthly payments, but they reduce the total interest paid and allow the owner to eliminate the debt much sooner. Shorter loans also help prevent situations where the loan outlasts the useful life of the vehicle or where the owner remains financially tied to the car long after its value has significantly declined. Equally important is recognizing that financial stability often comes from maintaining margin within your budget. Margin means having enough flexibility to handle unexpected events without immediately turning to debt. Cars occasionally require repairs. Tires wear out, batteries fail, accidents happen. When a vehicle already consumes a large share of income, even routine issues can become stressful. But when transportation costs remain comfortably below the limits of the household budget, those same events become manageable inconveniences rather than financial crises. In the long run, the goal of responsible car ownership isn't simply minimizing expenses. It's creating a financial environment where transportation serves your life rather than controlling it. That might mean choosing a less expensive model, driving an older vehicle longer, or prioritizing reliability and practicality over prestige and novelty. Each of those decisions preserves financial flexibility, the ability to save, invest, and make future choices without being constrained by a large, fixed monthly obligation. And over time, that flexibility can become far more valuable than the short-term excitement of driving something new. The next time you're sitting in a dealership parking lot staring at a window sticker, remember that price tag isn't just asking for money. It's asking for hours, years of your life, years of payments, years of financial pressure, years of decisions built around one monthly bill, and maybe that new car smell is worth it to some people. But if the numbers don't make sense for you, walking away isn't failure. It's financial intelligence. Because sometimes the smartest move you can make is realizing the system expects you to stretch and choosing not to. This is FiscalRelic, where we break down the financial systems most people never question. And if you want to build real wealth instead of expensive obligations, make sure you subscribe, because the next video might save you thousands.